Right, well, for those of you not been here before, let me just give you a bit of background to the topics that we do on the third Sunday this year. Phil and I were talking last year, and I suddenly came out with the ridiculous idea of why don't we go through my faults? And so we're now on the third year, but never mind. So today it's, why am I so selfish? And in essence, I do know I'm selfish. In fact, doing this sermon itself is selfish. I like doing sermons because it means I spend an awful lot of time researching them, and that actually gives me an awful lot of knowledge, which I wouldn't otherwise have done. So in a way, that's quite selfish. But today, therefore, is very personal. But what I will say is, if it resonates with you, well. So, why am I so selfish? Well, I actually put it down to the fact that I'm pretty competitive. I am extremely competitive. I don't know why I'm competitive. I was never brought up to be competitive, but and you as well. Yes. Ah, gotcha. Sorry, for those of you who are listening to this on YouTube, etc., one has just pointed at a young child whose parents are glaring at him. So, in terms of it, I will name him afterwards, though. So, in terms of it, just to give you a simple example, when I was a sort of a teenager and I'd walk through the town, if anybody was walking slightly quicker than me, I would deliberately speed up to walk quicker than them. That's really sad at the end of the day. However, I thought I'd give you some quotes from people who are rather good at what they do. And the first one is from Chris Evert, tennis player. She said, to be a tennis champion, you have to be inflexible. You have to be stubborn. You have to be arrogant. You have to be selfish and self-absorbed. Kind of tunnel vision, almost. Okay, well, I can see that. I can live with that one. Jensen Button. I love this one. It sounds really stupid if you just read the first few words. When it comes to my racing career, I'm very driven. I thought he drove himself, but never mind. That was the whole point of it. In any case, when it comes to my racing career, I'm very driven and very selfish. People who are around me at races will know that I'm a different person here than in my personal life. I completely blank people at races. I need to be focused. I'm rude. And lastly, my favourite, because I think this is just the worst one of the lot. Sorry, Sarah Brightman. You do have to be fairly selfish when you have a gift, darling. You cannot afford to let too many outside things get in your way. Well, you see, to a degree, I do understand those. Because if you are goal-driven, if you are focused, then you do tend to put yourself first and let everyone else fall behind. So really, it's not an excuse. But of course, the problem is that in today's society, we wrap people up in personal targets. Personal achievement is pushed at you from toddler, school, work, and play. We actually have a society that admires and rewards success. I wonder how many guys here would actually admit that they spend or have spent too much time at work and miss their kids growing up. I did. Yeah, look at him. It's not going to let the wife see me put my hand up, but actually, yes, if you'd have just cast your eye along to the left, you'd have seen Jonathan do it. Okay, right. So how many here would admit that? How many here won't admit it, but actually will think about it? Do you know, in the English language, if we go for the Oxford English Dictionary, the Oxford English Dictionary lists 171,000 words, approximately, plus another 45,000 that are defunct. The Global Language Monitor, which comes from the good old USA, in January went over its 1 millionth word. That's incredible, isn't it? You actually think to yourself, hang on, how come the Americans have got more words than we have? It's our language. Do you want to know what the 1 millionth word was? It was Web 2.0. That's not a word. That's not fair. You can't have that. But just take the 171,000 with the 45,000 that are extinct. We use approximately 400 of those on a regular basis. That's all. Of which the most common, apart from the and a, the four most common words that are in use are me, my, mine, and I. And of course, every time you turn on the television or listen to the radio, adverts constantly tell us that we should have this because we're worth it. And that's our kind of self-rap, isn't it? We're worth it. Well, I wonder how many of you have ever, historically, ever played that awful little game where you take a flower and you go, loves me not. Anybody ever done that? Yeah. Oh, there's Jill over there. Destroyer of natural flowers. Loves me not, loves me not. Yes, indeed. Yes, we can see what happens with that. We tear a flower off in the hope that by the time we get round to the last one, it is loves me. Today's reading was not just for Tom and Naomi. Are you actually having that at your wedding? It's a fairly common one. You haven't decided yet. No, Tom, I'm not talking to you. You don't make the decisions, mate. Naomi? No? You've not decided yet. Okay. It's a brilliant one to have at weddings. So many people who don't go to church regularly actually do have that one because they don't know what to have, and the vicar goes, well, 1 Corinthians 13, it's really good. But in fact, when you go into 1 Corinthians 13, there's an awful lot of love me's, but there's also 8 love me nots. Because when you look through it, it's all about what we think of being in love and being unselfish. But it does have 8 love me not dangers. The love me nots that sit in there is envy, boasting, pride, rudeness, self-seeking, angered, record of wrongs, and delighting in evil. Each one of those, it says, love does not envy, love does not boast, love has no pride, love is not rude, love is not self-seeking, love is not easily angered, love keeps no record of wrongs, and love does not delight in evil. The love me nots in 1 Corinthians 13. And if you go through that list, are they not the makeup of a selfish person? Someone who is envious, who boasts, who's proud, who's rude, who's self-seeking, who's easily angered, who keeps a record of all the wrongs that other people do against them and tracks it through, and who delights in evil. Someone, therefore, who is wrapped up in themselves. Someone who is a taker and not a giver that 1 Corinthians 13 is trying to get over. Well, we could have a look at some of these. We could do. Oh, excellent. We've got to it. Enviousness. Well, enviousness, we could also add resentment in there. And one of my favourite quotes is from Carrie Fisher. She says, resentment is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. And it really is right if you think about it. If you are envious of someone else, if you resent what they've got, whatever it is actually the poison inside you, but you're waiting for them to have the effect. My other favourite comes from Carlos Ruiz Zafón, an author. He says, envy, he doesn't hang about on this one. This is really to the core. Envy is the religion of the mediocre. It comforts them. It soothes their worries. And finally, it rots their souls, allowing them to justify their meanness and their greed until they believe these to be virtues. Oh, link that into the more Coke sketch you've just seen. The opposite, of course, of envy and resentment is contentment. And the Bible actually has quite a lot to say about being content. In 1 Timothy 6, but godliness actually is a means of great gain when accompanied by contentment. For we have brought nothing into the world, so we cannot take anything out of it either. You start with nothing, you end with nothing, ergo, what's the point of chasing everything when you're in the middle of that? And then Hebrews. Keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. For everything else, there's access. But for real wealth, there's God. It's a hard call, really, in today's world to do that. Not to be envious, not to really look at what other people have got, but really what we must do is to focus on the great gifts that God gives us, rather than the bits that we don't have. Then we get to boasting. In terms of boasting, we could describe this as the desire to prove verbally that we've achieved much, even if it's jolly uncomfortable to the person who's listening to it. In Matthew 6 it says, "Be careful not to do your acts of righteousness before men, to be seen by them. If you do, you'll have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honored by men. I tell you the truth, they have received their reward in full." You see, one of the things about a selfish person is that they always want to make certain that they are at the top of the tree and other people know that they are at the top of the tree. And one of the ways of doing this, of course, is verbally jousting. And to be honest with you guys, I do it. I know I do it. I go along to a party, you meet somebody new, and they go, "Oh, well, my children," and that's it. We're into verbal jousting at that point in time, because they are going to tell me how wonderful their children are. And I am therefore going to tell them exactly how much more my children are wonderful than their children are wonderful, and the list of achievements comes out, including the half dozen that my children have never done but are very useful because they slay anything that anybody else tells me. So the great thing is if you are going to be a Christian person, it's not to boast, it's not to do the one-upmanship, it is actually to listen. That's one of the arts that we lose, which the great Christians, of course, have. And we meet great Christians, and we love them dearly because they sit and listen to us. They have the art of listening. Now, some of you will know that I actually went to theological college. Some of you will know that I got thrown out before the end of the course. Not literally, by circumstance of having a problem in terms of a rather unpleasant break-in at home. But at the end of it, one of the things that they did do was they did do pastoral care at college. And I did do the day on pastoral care, which was brilliant. Because before I went to college, if somebody started to whine on at me about their problems, I used to go, "Oh, pull yourself together." And as a result of that day, I am now qualified. I go, "Oh, pull yourself together, please." So really, at the end of it, we do need to listen more. I need to listen more. Next, pride. Oh, this is the killer, isn't it? I mean, I don't really say it. The Bible says it all about it. In Proverbs, the Lord detests all the proud of heart. Be sure of this, they will not go unpunished. I mean, we don't need the other two. That in itself is a big enough warning that pride is on God's list for a big hammer on the head. Galatians, if anyone thinks he's something when he's nothing, he deceives himself. Isn't it often when we're sort of very proud that we do deceive ourselves? And in 1 Peter 5, all of you, clothe yourselves with humility towards one another, because God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Of course, rudeness. Rudeness really is an automatic reaction of someone whose pride's been wounded. It's the impact, if you like, to cover their own inadequacies by attacking someone else. Proverbs says, "The mouth of the righteous is a fountain of life, but violence overwhelms the mouth of the wicked. Hatred stirs up dissension, but love covers all wrongs. Wisdom is found on the lips of the discerning, but a rod is for the back of him who lacks judgment." I love the next bit. "Wise men store up knowledge, but the mouth of a fool invites ruin." And of course, the trouble is, in many cases, when we use rudeness as a form of attack, it just spirals. And Proverbs says to us, "A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. The tongue of the wise commend knowledge, but the mouth of the fool gushes folly." We should be able to deal with things without being rude. But I have to say, it did not feel good on occasions, but still. Oh, my next one I call WINITS. Now, for some of you, WINITS won't be a phrase that you know. WINITS is what's in it for me. That's what WINITS stands for, which of course is what self-seeking is all about. You see, self-seeking greed, it's the fact that I'm too important to give without getting something back in return. I'm too important to have to sacrifice anything. To judge one's own worth from the gain that you make from each transaction. Did I win in that transaction, whether it's a verbal transaction, a monetary transaction, or what? In Luke 12 it says, and he said to them, watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. Sometimes it's far better to lose something than it is to gain something. And in Isaiah 57, this is pretty horrendous, it says that God looks down on sinful man and makes the following comment. I was enraged by his sinful greed. I punished him and hid my face in anger. Yet he kept on in his willful ways. And I wonder how many times do I actually go through something and I think, that's wrong, I mustn't do that again. And then quite naturally later on, there I am, doing it again. Anger, of course, we covered a couple of months ago. So, for those of you who've forgotten it all, I'll just give you a couple of quotes. Proverbs, a heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones. And in James, everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. For a man's anger does not bring about the righteous life that God desires. Oh, yes. I wonder how many times that just slips. We cover it up sometimes, but I wonder how many times we actually inwardly become very angry with what's going on around us. And sometimes there's good anger, but mostly it's pretty bad stuff. Then the record of wrongs. Yeah, guilty. When somebody does something you think, bristle, don't like that at all. And instead of just letting it go, you hang on to it. And you suddenly have a list of people with wrongs. For those of you IT nerds, we have a database, okay? Person, wrong, and the sort of 1 to 10 scale of it. You see, the thing is, we're not called on to judge others, but how often do we hold the wrongs done to us and keep a mental record? You see, without forgiveness, we become the victims of our own list. Not the other person. We become the victims of our own list. You see, if you look at the Lord's Prayer, there's only one condition in the Lord's Prayer. The rest is fine. There's one condition. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive, etc., etc. That's pretty naff, isn't it? Having to forgive others. The only condition that we're given in the Lord's Prayer. You see, without forgiving other people, we actually precondition our response to them. If we're always holding a grudge against them, we will never have good relations with them because it will always be under the surface. How difficult it is, and how it offends our sense of fairness to forgive someone. And yet we thrive on God's forgiveness. Hebrews 9. In fact, the law requires that nearly everything be cleansed with blood, and without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness. In our personal situations, the blood is letting go of that list, is forgiving other people. You see, we memorize a lot, but we also remember that we have no problem with the fact that God has no memory, no list of our wrongdoings. God harbors no grudges. Delighting in evil. We really need to try and resist or evade the evils that gently pull us away from the path of love, because that's the path we're called to be on. And perhaps one of the biggest evils that we get embroiled in is what I call spreading unhelpful information about others, or to put it in its context, gossip. You see, spreading information about others, whether it's gossip or whether it's racism or whether it's quite literally not doing something that we're supposed to do, generally tends to give us quite a good feeling inside. We rationalize what we're doing. And that's when we start to inwardly delight. And we start to like that feeling. Well, we have certain natural reactions as human beings. We're naturally protective of ourselves. You all know about the fight or flee. You know, you're suddenly crossing a road, a horn goes, you fight or flee. I would suggest you flee, because having a fight with a car coming at you ain't good news. But that's our natural reaction. And of course our worldview is very self-centered. Now, there's a wonderful tale that Dostoevsky told. And it was about the woman who was sent to hell. And she felt very aggrieved at being sent to hell. So she cried out to God. And God heard her. And God had mercy. And he said to the woman, okay, I'll take you out of hell and bring you up to heaven. But in order for me to do that, I really need some form of link. Tell me something that you've done, some good deed that you've done in your life. Just one. And the woman thought. And thought. And then she remembered that once she had given an onion to a neighbor who was starving. So she said to God, I once gave an onion to a neighbor who was starving. And God said, fine, that'll do. That's a good deed. And he produces an onion. You know, the bulb and the long stalk. And he holds on to the bulb and he puts the long stalk down into hell. He says, grab hold of that and I'll pull you up. And she grabs hold of it. And as he starts to pull her up, other people see that she's escaping hell. And they grab onto her skirts and her ankles. The onion was very strong. But what the onion could not take and broke when she tried to kick them off. Because for her, getting out of hell was the only thing. The rest were not important. And I wonder which one of us could throw the first stone at that woman for what she did. God, of course, gives us examples. The biggest example, of course, is Jesus. Jesus, the most powerful person who's ever walked this earth, yet he came as a servant. He put his own safety and comfort behind the need to be saved. His love was totally greater than our sin. And God, in fact, gives us a requirement. Matthew 12:30. He simply says to us, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. You see, pretty much for the selfish person, you come unstuck. You can maybe love God because you're not in competition with God, but to love your neighbor, that's where you come unstuck. You see, the big danger is that we fail to actually serve others. No one can be Christ-like unless they're unselfish. And if we're going to be Christ-like, we automatically must put ourselves second. In Mark 9, it says, sitting down, Jesus called the 12 and said, if anyone wants to be first, he must be the very last and the servant of all. You can't do that if you're selfish. See, the trouble is, I do struggle with selfishness. Sometimes I win, but mostly I lose. I only win when I focus on God's grace and realize just how little the sacrifice is that I must make compared to the sacrifice that Jesus made for me. Sometimes I lose, even when I think I'm winning, because I'm doing it for the wrong reason. Sadhu Vaswani, a Hindu, said this: if my love is without sacrifice, it's selfish. Such a love is barter, for there is an exchange of love and devotion in return for something. It is conditional love. We are called to give unconditional love. I only survive because God's love is far greater than anything I do. And to be honest with you, without it, I'd be sunk already. Amen.